are celebrated with a special meal, a chance for family and friends to come together across generations.
King Charles has discovered something about Diana that has remained hidden for nearly 3 decades. A secret so profound that it has shaken him to his core and forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about their marriage, her death, and the choices he made. What he found changes the entire story, the discovery that shattered everything. On the evening of November 28, 2025, King Charles was alone in his private study at Clarence House when he made a discovery that would alter his understanding of his entire past. He had been sorting through personal items, letters, photographs, documents that had been in storage for years, as part of a project he had been quietly undertaking since becoming king. He wanted to organize his personal archives to ensure that his own legacy would be properly documented when the time came. But among the boxes and files, he found something that had been overlooked for decades. Something that had been misfiled, mislabeled, or perhaps deliberately hidden where it would not be easily discovered. The exact nature of how it ended up in Charles's possession remains unclear, whether it was always meant for him eventually, or whether its placement in his archives was an accident of history. But there it was, suddenly in front of him, impossible to ignore. Charles sat at his desk for over 3 hours that night, reading and rereading what he had found. Staff members who passed by the study reported seeing the light well past midnight, which was unusual for the king, who typically keeps to a strict schedule. When he finally emerged, those who saw him described a man who looked as though he had aged years in a single evening. His face was drawn, his eyes red, and he requested that his morning appointments be cleared without explanation. The following day, Charles made an extraordinary series of phone calls. He spoke with Prince William for over an hour, a conversation that sources describe as emotional and difficult. He reached out to Prince Harry despite the ongoing tensions between them, insisting that they needed to talk immediately. He contacted several individuals who had been close to Diana, asking questions about events from 30 years ago, seeking confirmation of details that suddenly took on new significance. Palace staff were baffled. Something had clearly happened, but Charles was not sharing details. He instructed his private secretaries to locate specific individuals, some who had not been in regular contact with the royal family for decades. He requested access to additional archives, including materials that had been sealed since Diana's death. And he spent hours alone processing whatever he had discovered, grappling with revelations that clearly challenged everything he had believed about his past. The word secret implies something scandalous or shameful, but those close to Charles describe his reaction differently. He was not angry or betrayed in the way one might expect. Instead, he seemed devastated by grief and regret. Emotions that suggested the secret was not about something Diana had done wrong, but rather about something he had misunderstood, missed, or failed to appreciate during her lifetime. In the days that followed, Charles's behavior shifted noticeably. He became withdrawn during official engagements, going through the motions but clearly preoccupied. He canceled several private dinners and social commitments, something he rarely does. And in conversations with those he trusts most, he began speaking about Diana in ways he never had before, with a depth of understanding and remorse that surprised even people who had known him for decades. What exactly had Charles discovered? The palace has remained completely silent on the specifics, which is itself remarkable. Usually, when royals face personal crises or revelations, some version of events leaks through unofficial channels. But in this case, those who know what Charles found have maintained absolute discretion. Either they have been explicitly instructed to say nothing, or they themselves recognize that this revelation is too personal, too profound to be treated as gossip. But based on Charles's actions, his emotional state, and the pattern of his inquiries since that November evening, certain conclusions can be drawn. Diana left something behind, something that documented her true feelings, her genuine perspective on their marriage, perhaps her hopes for her sons and for Charles himself. And whatever she left revealed a truth that Charles had never fully grasped during her lifetime, or in the nearly 30 years since her death. The discovery has forced the king to confront uncomfortable questions about his own role in Diana's unhappiness, about choices he made that seemed reasonable at the time but now appear deeply flawed. It has given him insight into who Diana really was beneath the public image. The vulnerable, complicated, deeply feeling woman who struggled within the constraints of royal life while trying desperately to be a good mother, a good person, and yes, even a good wife despite a marriage that was falling apart. And perhaps most painfully, the discovery has shown Charles what might have been different if he had understood Diana better, if he had made different choices, if he had been capable of giving her what she actually needed rather than what he thought she needed. It is the kind of revelation that cannot be undone or forgotten, that permanently alters how you see your own history. For a man who has spent his entire life focused on duty and tradition, who has often struggled to express or even acknowledge deep emotions, this discovery has been profoundly destabilizing. But it has also, in a strange way, freed him. Because for the first time, Charles truly understands the woman he was married to, the mother of his children, the person whose death shaped so much of what came after, what Diana actually left behind. The secret that King Charles discovered was not a single document or letter, but rather a collection, a personal archive that Diana had carefully compiled during the final years of her life. Sources close to the situation describe it as a combination of written reflections, recorded conversations, and personal items that together paint a remarkably complete picture of Diana's inner life during the period when her marriage was collapsing and her public role was reaching its peak. Diana began creating this archive sometime in 1994, shortly after Charles publicly admitted his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles in a television interview. She was devastated by the admission, even though she had known about the relationship for years. But the public nature of it, the humiliation of having her husband's infidelity confirmed on national television, pushed her to do something she had been considering for some time, to document her own truth in her own words for a future time when she would not be around to defend herself. The archive includes handwritten journals, not daily entries, but longer reflective pieces written during quiet moments when Diana felt compelled to process her thoughts and feelings. These were not the careful, politically minded writings of someone thinking about posterity. They were raw, honest, sometimes contradictory expressions of a woman trying to make sense of an impossible situation. Diana wrote about her love for William and Harry, about her fears for their future, about the ways the royal system was failing them, and how desperately she wanted to protect them from the same damage she had suffered. But she also wrote about Charles. And this is where the discovery becomes truly significant. Because Diana did not simply document his failures as a husband or her pain over his relationship with Camilla. She wrote with remarkable nuance about who Charles was, his strengths and weaknesses, his own damage from his childhood, the ways he had been trapped by duty and expectation just as she had been. She wrote about moments of genuine connection they had shared, times when she glimpsed the man he might have been if circumstances had been different. More surprisingly, Diana wrote about her own failures. She acknowledged times when she had been manipulative, when her emotional instability had made situations worse, when she had used the boys as pawns in conflicts with Charles. She admitted to affairs and explained not just that they happened, but why. The desperate need for attention and affection, the desire to hurt Charles as he had hurt her, the fantasy that someone outside the royal system might truly love and understand her. The archive also includes audio recordings. Diana had spoken with several therapists during this period, and she kept recordings of some of their sessions, apparently with the therapist's knowledge and consent. These tapes document her struggle with bulimia, her battles with depression and anxiety, her complex feelings about her role as Princess of Wales. But they also capture her growth, her increasing psychological sophistication, her developing ability to see her situation with clarity rather than just react emotionally. Perhaps most poignantly, the archive contains letters Diana wrote but never sent. There are letters to William and Harry, to be opened when they were older, explaining her actions and choices during their childhood. There are letters to Charles, some angry, some conciliatory, some heartbreakingly vulnerable, in which she tried to express things she could never say to him directly. But perhaps the most significant element of the archive is a long letter Diana wrote specifically to Charles, dated August 15, 1997, just 2 weeks before her death. The letter was sealed with instructions that it only be opened by Charles after her death. Through some administrative confusion or deliberate decision by those handling Diana's estate, the letter was never delivered to Charles after the accident in Paris. Instead, it was filed away with other personal effects, labeled incorrectly and forgotten for nearly 3 decades. This letter is what Charles found on November 2025, and according to those who have been told about its contents, it contains Diana's most honest and complete expression of her feelings about their marriage, their divorce, and their shared future as parents. She wrote it during a period of relative peace, after the worst of the divorce had been settled, but before she had found new romantic stability with Dodi Fayed. In the letter, Diana apparently acknowledged that their marriage had been doomed from the start, not because either of them was a bad person, but because they were fundamentally incompatible, and because the circumstances of their courtship and wedding had been impossible. She wrote about the pressure they had both been under, the scrutiny, the expectations that neither could fulfill. She expressed genuine understanding of Charles's position, caught between duty and personal happiness, raised to suppress emotion, incapable of giving her the romantic love she desperately needed. But Diana also wrote something that has apparently devastated Charles in the reading. She expressed love for him, not the passionate romantic love of their early relationship or the bitter resentment of their later years, but a mature, clear-eyed affection for the father of her children, the man with whom she had shared some of the most significant years of her life. She wrote that she forgave him for the pain he had caused her, and hoped he could forgive her for her own contributions to their disaster. The letter was an act of grace from a woman who had every reason to remain bitter, but who had done enough emotional work to move beyond bitterness. It was Diana offering Charles something he had never received from her during their marriage: genuine understanding and acceptance of who he was, rather than disappointment that he was not who she needed him to be. And it arrived 27 years too late, found by accident, read by a man who has spent nearly 3 decades believing that Diana died hating him. The hidden truth about their marriage. What Diana's secret archive reveals about her marriage to Charles fundamentally contradicts the simplified narratives that have dominated public understanding for 3 decades. The story we have been told, and that many have accepted as complete truth, is of a cold, distant older man who never loved his young bride, who used her to produce heirs while maintaining his real relationship with his mistress, and who drove a vulnerable woman to despair through emotional neglect and infidelity. That version contains the truth. Charles was emotionally unavailable. He did maintain his relationship with Camilla. Diana did suffer tremendously, but the archive reveals layers of complexity that neither the pro-Diana nor pro-Charles factions have wanted to acknowledge, because complexity does not fit neatly into tabloid headlines or public narratives about villains and victims. Diana's journals and letters reveal that, in the early days of their marriage, Charles genuinely tried to make her happy. He was not naturally demonstrative or romantic, but he attempted to be attentive in ways that made sense to him. He bought her gifts, planned activities he thought she would enjoy, tried to include her in his interests. The problem was that his attempts were profoundly mismatched with what Diana actually needed. She needed constant reassurance, physical affection, emotional openness, and passionate romantic love. Charles offered thoughtful gestures, intellectual companionship, and duty-focused partnership. Diana writes about nights when she would cry herself to sleep while Charles worked at his desk, completely unaware of her distress in the same room. She describes his bafflement when she became upset over things that seemed trivial to him, his frustration when she could not simply compose herself and carry on with scheduled duties. But she also acknowledges that she never explicitly told him what she needed. She expected him to know, to intuitively understand her emotional state, to read her mind the way romantic partners do in movies. The archive also reveals that Camilla's presence in Charles's life was more complicated than the simple ongoing affair that has been assumed. There were periods when Charles genuinely tried to distance himself from Camilla to focus on his marriage. Diana documents times when she knew he was making this effort, when she felt hopeful that things might improve. But she also admits that her own insecurity and suspicion made it nearly impossible for Charles to succeed. One particularly revealing entry describes an incident from 1985 when Charles planned a special weekend for just the two of them, hoping to reconnect. Diana was suspicious of his motives, convinced it was some kind of manipulation. She spent the entire weekend withdrawn and hostile, refusing to engage with his attempts at conversation or intimacy. Charles eventually gave up, hurt and confused. Diana writes that she later realized he had been genuinely trying, that his awkward effort had been authentic, but by then the moment had passed. Diana writes candidly about her affairs, with James Hewitt, with others who have never been publicly identified. She explains that she was not looking for sex primarily, though that was part of it. She was looking for someone who would make her feel desired, valuable, understood. She was looking for the romantic intensity that her marriage lacked. But she also admits that the affairs were ultimately empty, that the men involved were often using her for their own purposes. What emerges from the archive is a picture of two people who were catastrophically mismatched, but who were both, in their own ways, trying to make an impossible situation work. Charles's fundamental inability to provide emotional intimacy was not mere coldness or indifference. It was a limitation born from his own damaged upbringing, his training to suppress feeling, his complete lack of models for how to be emotionally available. Diana's desperate need for constant reassurance and dramatic expressions of love was not mere neediness. It was the result of her own childhood wounds, her father's emotional distance, her mother's abandonment, her deep insecurity about her own worth. The tragedy, Diana writes in one particularly powerful passage, was that they might have been able to help each other heal if they had understood what they were both dealing with. Charles needed someone who could teach him that emotions were not dangerous, that vulnerability was not weakness. Diana needed someone who could provide a steady, reliable presence even when she was difficult. But neither of them had the self-awareness or the tools to offer what the other needed. What Charles has discovered in Diana's archive is not that he was blameless or that Diana was secretly at fault. He has discovered that the truth was more nuanced, more human, more mutually tragic than either the pro-Charles or pro-Diana narratives have acknowledged. He was not a villain, but neither was he a victim. Diana was not a saint, but neither was she unstable and unreasonable. They were two people who hurt each other badly while also occasionally showing each other genuine kindness and struggling in their limited ways to make an impossible situation workable. Why Diana kept this secret? The question that haunts Charles and that will puzzle anyone who learns about Diana's archive is why she created this detailed, honest record but kept it secret, hidden away where it might never be found. Why would Diana pour her heart and soul into documenting her truth but not ensure that truth reached the people who most needed to hear it? The answer reveals something profound about who Diana was in those final years of her life and what she had learned through her suffering. Diana kept this secret because she had come to understand that some truths are too dangerous to speak, while emotions are still raw, and while the power dynamics that cause damage are still in place. She had learned this lesson the hard way through her participation in Andrew Morton's biography and her explosive Panorama interview with Martin Bashir. Both times, she had told parts of her truth publicly, and both times the consequences had been severe, not just for Charles and the royal family, but for her own sons, and ultimately, for herself. After the Panorama interview in November 1995, Diana watched as the backlash unfolded. The Queen moved quickly toward forcing a divorce. Diana's position within the royal family became even more tenuous. And worst of all, William and Harry were exposed to endless media speculation about their parents' bitter conflict. William in particular was angry with his mother for the interview, feeling that she had exposed their private family pain for public consumption. So when she began compiling her archive, she made a conscious decision. This would be for later, for a time when the emotional heat had dissipated, when her sons were adults who could process difficult truths without being damaged by them, when even Charles might be able to hear what she had to say without the defensiveness that characterized their every interaction while married. Diana was creating a time capsule, not a weapon. There was also the matter of her own continued evolution. Diana's therapy sessions, documented in the archive, reveal a woman who was actively changing her understanding of herself and her situation. In her earlier sessions, she speaks almost entirely as a victim. Charles was cold, the royal family was cruel, she was innocent and betrayed. But as therapy continued and as she did the difficult work of genuine self-examination, her perspective shifted. She began to see her own role in the dysfunction, her own patterns of manipulation and emotional volatility, the ways she had contributed to the failure of her marriage. This growth created a problem. If Diana released her truth while she was still in the middle of processing it, she would inevitably present a distorted picture, one that might accurately capture how she felt in a given moment, but would not represent her complete, mature understanding. So she waited, continuing to add to the archive as her understanding deepened, intending eventually to decide what to do with it when she had reached a stable, clear perspective on her entire experience. Diana also kept the secret because she feared what Charles might do with the information if he received it too soon. Despite her growing compassion for him, she still did not entirely trust him. She worried that if she extended genuine forgiveness and understanding while they were still battling over divorce terms, custody arrangements, and public image, he might use her olive branch as ammunition. But perhaps the deepest reason Diana kept her secret was that she was not keeping it forever. She was keeping it until she was ready to reveal it properly. The archive was not meant to be discovered by accident decades after her death. Diana was building toward some kind of resolution, some moment when she would have the courage and clarity to share her truth in a way that might actually heal rather than wound. There are hints in her later journal entries that she was planning to write a book someday, not a sensational tell-all, but a thoughtful memoir written from a place of hard-won wisdom. She wanted to tell her story not as revenge, but as a way of helping other people who were trapped in damaging relationships, who struggled with mental health, who felt crushed by systems and expectations they had not chosen. In one entry from July 1997, Diana writes about a conversation she had with a therapist about timing. She notes that she is not yet ready to go public with her full truth because she has not yet completely forgiven herself for her own failures. She writes that she needs to reach a place of genuine self-acceptance before she can speak with the authority and clarity she wants. She sets a tentative goal by her 40th birthday in July 1998. She will make some decisions about how to share what she has learned. But Diana never reached 40. She died 2 weeks after writing her final letter to Charles, before she had completed her emotional journey, before she had decided how and when to reveal her archive. The secret was supposed to be temporary, a protective measure until the right moment arrived. Instead, it became permanent, locked away by the randomness of death and the administrative chaos that followed her funeral. Charles now understands that Diana had intended for him to know these things eventually. The letter he found makes that clear. She wanted him to understand her perspective, to see the full picture, to recognize that she did not die hating him. But she had wanted to control when and how that understanding came to him, and death stole that control. This realization has added another layer to Charles's grief, because it means that Diana was moving toward reconciliation, toward maturity, toward a relationship with him that could have been genuinely cooperative and maybe even warm. If she had lived another year, 2 years, 5 years, they might have reached a place where they could talk honestly, where they could acknowledge the tragedy of their marriage without blame. Diana kept her secret for good reasons: to protect her sons, to wait for the right moment, to avoid weaponizing her truth while emotions were still destructive. But the randomness of her death meant that the secret was kept far longer than she intended, that it reached Charles decades too late, that the opportunity for genuine healing while they were both alive was lost. How this changes Charles's reign. The discovery of Diana's secret has come at a pivotal moment in Charles's life and reign, and it is already reshaping his approach to kingship in ways both subtle and profound. Charles has been king for just over 3 years, still finding his footing in a role he waited longer than any heir in British history to assume. He is dealing with cancer, facing questions about the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain, and trying to repair relationships within his own fractured family. And now, just when he needs focus and stability, he has been hit with revelations that have shaken his understanding of his own past. The immediate impact has been emotional and personal. Those close to Charles describe a man who has been crying more than they have ever seen, who speaks about Diana with a depth of feeling and regret that surprises even his longtime confidants. Charles has always been somewhat sentimental, prone to melancholy, but this is different. He is grieving not just Diana's death, but the loss of possibilities he never knew existed, the reconciliation they might have achieved, the mature friendship they might have built, the understanding that was developing on Diana's side but never reached him until decades too late. This grief has forced Charles into profound reflection about his entire approach to relationships and duty. For his whole life, Charles has prioritized obligation over personal connection, has suppressed his emotions to fulfill his role, and has made choices based on what was expected rather than what he genuinely wanted or needed. The results have been disastrous: a failed marriage, estranged sons, decades of unhappiness for himself and those around him. Diana's archive has confronted him with the full cost of his emotional unavailability, and it has come at a moment when he finally has the power to make different choices. One immediate change has been in Charles's relationship with Prince William. After discovering the archive, Charles called his eldest son and spoke with him for over an hour about Diana, not just reminiscing about her or expressing grief, but genuinely trying to help William understand who his mother was becoming in those final years. Charles shared with William some of what Diana had written about her love for her sons, her hopes for their future, her determination to break the cycle of royal emotional dysfunction. And he apologized to William for ways that the bitter divorce and his own emotional limitations had made William's childhood more difficult than it needed to be. This conversation, sources say, was the most honest and emotionally open discussion Charles and William have ever had. William has always been somewhat distant with his father, respectful but not truly close, shaped by his mother's pain and by his own disappointment in how Charles handled his marriage. But Charles's willingness to be vulnerable, to admit fault, to share Diana's words with genuine humility, this created an opening for deeper connection. Charles has also reached out to Prince Harry, and this may be the most consequential impact of the discovery. The relationship between Charles and Harry has been deeply damaged by Harry's public criticisms in interviews and in his memoir. Charles felt betrayed and wounded by Harry's characterization of him as a cold, inadequate father. Harry felt his truth was being dismissed, and that his father cared more about protecting the institution than about his son's well-being. But Diana's archive has given Charles perspective on Harry's pain. Reading Diana's descriptions of her own struggles with mental health, her feelings of being trapped and misunderstood by the royal system, Charles can now see clear parallels with Harry's experience. Diana wrote about feeling silenced when she tried to express her distress, about being told that her duty was to simply carry on regardless of her suffering. Harry has said almost exactly the same things about his own treatment by the institution. Charles called Harry and, according to sources, said something he has never been able to say before. "I understand now. I see what your mother went through, and I see what you have been trying to tell me." This acknowledgement, this validation of Harry's experience, is something Harry has been desperate for but never expected to receive. The conversation was emotional for both of them, and while it has not magically resolved all their conflicts, it has opened a door that had been firmly closed. The discovery is also affecting how Charles approaches his constitutional duties and public role. Diana's archive has given him a different perspective on what it means to use his position well. Diana wrote about the profound satisfaction she found in her charitable work, in using her fame and platform to draw attention to causes that mattered: landmine victims, people with AIDS, the homeless. She wrote about how this work gave her life meaning and purpose in a way that ceremonial duties never could. Charles is now reconsidering what kind of king he wants to be. He is looking for ways to use his platform not for political interference but for moral leadership on issues that transcend party politics. Climate change, interfaith dialogue, support for young people struggling with mental health. He is asking himself what Diana would do with the power and attention he now commands. Perhaps most significantly, the discovery has changed how Charles thinks about Camilla's role and his own choices regarding his personal life. For years, Charles justified his relationship with Camilla by telling himself that he deserved personal happiness, that his marriage to Diana had been impossible, that he had done his duty by producing heirs and was entitled to choose love over obligation. Diana's letter has complicated that narrative. Diana did not condemn his relationship with Camilla. She actually gave it her blessing, hoping that Charles would find with Camilla the happiness he could not find with her. But she also gently challenged him to be honest about the cost, to acknowledge the pain his choices had caused not just to her, but to their sons, and to commit to being the best father he could be as a way of honoring the family they had created together. Charles is now more willing to acknowledge the full reality of his choices. In recent conversations with aides, he has spoken more openly about his regrets regarding his marriage to Diana, about wishes that he had handled things differently, about sorrow for the pain he caused. This does not mean he regrets his relationship with Camilla. He loves her genuinely and depends on her support, but he is no longer hiding behind justifications. This newfound honesty is affecting how Charles presents himself publicly. He is less defensive, more willing to acknowledge the monarchy's past failures, more focused on how the institution can evolve and improve rather than just defending tradition. The discovery of Diana's secret has fundamentally changed Charles at a moment when his character and choices will shape the monarchy for years to come. The legacy Diana really left. The revelation of Diana's secret archive forces a fundamental reconsideration of her legacy and what she truly left behind for the world. For nearly 3 decades, Diana has been remembered through competing narratives. The people's princess who brought warmth and humanity to a cold institution, or the troubled woman whose instability damaged the monarchy. Both narratives contain elements of truth, but both are incomplete, flattened versions of a far more complex person. What Diana actually left behind, as revealed in her archive, is something more valuable than either sainthood or scandal. She left a record of genuine psychological and emotional growth, of a person doing the difficult work of understanding herself and taking responsibility for her own failures while also refusing to accept blame for damage that was not hers to own. She left evidence that people can evolve, that compassion and forgiveness are possible even after tremendous hurt, that maturity means holding complexity rather than clinging to simple stories of victimhood or villainy. This legacy matters profoundly for her sons. William and Harry have both struggled with their mother's memory in different ways. William has been protective of her image, defensive against any criticism, determined to honor her through his charitable work and his approach to parenting. But this devotion has sometimes trapped him in a simplified version of his mother, the perfect princess martyred by a cruel system. Harry, meanwhile, has used Diana's memory as validation for his own rebellion against the royal system, seeing in her struggles permission for his own departure and criticism. Diana's archive gives both sons something more useful than a martyred saint or a justification for anger. It gives them a fully human mother, flawed, struggling, but actively working to become better, to understand more deeply, to move beyond bitterness toward something like wisdom. William is discovering that his mother did not need him to defend a perfect image of her. She would have wanted him to see her clearly, to learn from both her strengths and her mistakes. Harry is discovering that his mother's struggles with the royal system were real and valid, but that she was also actively working toward forgiveness and reconciliation rather than just running away. For both princes, this more complete picture of Diana could be healing. It releases them from the burden of maintaining simplified narratives and allows them to integrate their mother's full humanity into their own identities. They can honor her without pretending she was perfect. They can acknowledge her pain without remaining trapped in it. They can learn from her evolution rather than just her suffering. The legacy Diana left also has implications for how the public remembers her and what her life represents. The cult of Diana, the flowers at Kensington Palace, the continued fascination with her death, the endless documentaries and books, has sometimes felt unhealthy, frozen in the moment of tragedy rather than allowing for growth and change. Diana herself would likely be uncomfortable with the way she has been frozen in time, turned into a symbol rather than remembered as a person. Her archive offers the possibility of a more mature collective memory. Instead of Diana as eternal victim or impossible saint, we can remember her as someone who struggled, made mistakes, hurt people, and was hurt by them, but who was actively becoming wiser and more compassionate. We can remember her growth rather than just her pain, her forgiveness rather than just her grievances. This version of Diana is actually more inspiring than the simplified martyr, because it shows that real people facing real difficulties can choose to evolve, to let go of bitterness, to extend grace even to those who have harmed them. For the monarchy itself, Diana's legacy, as revealed in the archive, is both challenging and potentially redemptive. Diana's critiques of the royal system were not unfounded. The institution did damage her, did fail to provide adequate support, did prioritize image over well-being. But her archive also shows that she did not want to destroy the monarchy. She wanted to reform it, to make it more human, to ensure her sons could serve the institution without being destroyed by it. This gives the current royal family a path forward. They can honor Diana's memory not by defending the system that harmed her, but by genuinely changing it. They can take her criticism seriously about the lack of mental health support, the destructive media management, the rigid protocols that prevent genuine human connection. They can build the kind of monarchy Diana was envisioning, one that serves the nation while also treating the individuals within it with basic compassion and support. King Charles in particular has the opportunity to make Diana's evolution toward forgiveness and understanding the foundation of his own legacy. He can acknowledge the failures of the past without being destroyed by guilt. He can honor Diana by creating the changes she died hoping to see: better support for royals struggling with mental health, more humane approaches to children growing up in the system, genuine prioritization of family well-being alongside constitutional duty. The archive also offers something to anyone struggling with difficult relationships, personal failure, or the work of forgiveness. Diana's journey from victim to someone capable of genuine compassion for the person who hurt her most, that journey is profoundly human and profoundly difficult. It required honesty about her own failings, willingness to see beyond her pain, commitment to growth even when it was uncomfortable. In her final letter to Charles, Diana wrote something that encapsulates the legacy she was building. "We cannot undo the past or erase the pain we caused each other, but we can choose what we become from here. I am choosing forgiveness not because you have earned it or because the hurt was not real, but because I deserve to be free from bitterness. I hope someday you might do the same." This is the legacy Diana really left. Not instructions for revenge or evidence for prosecution, but an example of someone choosing emotional freedom through the difficult work of forgiveness and self-awareness. Charles has now received this gift decades too late to respond to Diana directly, but not too late to let it transform how he lives the rest of his life and how he approaches his role as king. King Charles stands at Windsor Castle now, carrying the weight of Diana's secret, forever changed by what he has learned. He cannot go back and make different choices. He cannot give Diana the understanding and support she needed while she was alive. But he can honor what she became, implement what she hoped for, and ensure that her evolution toward wisdom and compassion becomes part of how history remembers both of them. And perhaps in doing so, he can finally give Diana something she never received during her marriage: genuine recognition of who she truly was beneath the princess and the icon and the headlines. A complicated, struggling, ultimately generous human being who deserved better than she got, but who refused to let damage define her forever. That is the secret King Charles has discovered, and it changes everything.